In 1923, a German professor walked into a bakery with a wheelbarrow full of marks. He needed bread. The baker looked at the wheelbarrow. He looked at the marks. He took the wheelbarrow and left the marks on the street. The metal of the wheelbarrow was worth more than the currency inside it. This is the moment that every economics textbook references when it discusses the Weimar hyperinflation. But here is what the textbook always leaves out. The baker did not want gold either. He wanted flour. He wanted firewood. He wanted the ability to keep his oven running and his family fed. And in that moment, in that economy, in that specific crisis, those things were worth more than gold. Not because gold had failed as a store of value. Gold performed exactly as it always has during currency crises. But because there are specific conditions, specific crisis environments, specific moments in the collapse sequence, where 5 other things become more immediately valuable than the most trusted store of value in human history. And those 5 things are not what most people preparing for economic uncertainty are accumulating. They are not what the financial media discusses when it talks about crisis protection. They are not what the gold dealer mentions when he sells you coins. But the forensic record of every major economic collapse across the past century, from Weimar Germany to Soviet Russia to Argentina to Venezuela to Lebanon, tells the same story with remarkable consistency. In the acute phase of a collapse, when institutions are failing and supply chains are breaking, and the monetary system is reorganizing itself around whatever will replace the dying currency, 5 specific things command a premium that no financial instrument can match. Here is what the economic autopsies actually found. The first thing is the one that the Russian dacha farmers understood before any economist put a name to it. The ability to produce food from land you control. Moscow suburbs, summer 1992. The Soviet Union has been dead for 8 months. Shop shelves are empty. Inflation is running at 2,600% annually. Pensions are evaporating in real time. And yet, 71% of Russian households have a dacha, a small plot of land outside the city, and they know how to use it. By 1992, dachas were producing 92% of Russia's potato crop, 77% of its vegetables, 87% of its berries and fruit, 59% of its meat, 49% of its milk. Households representing perhaps 3% of arable land were producing more than half of the country's food supply on plots averaging between 600 and 1,500 square meters. Russia did not experience a famine after the Soviet collapse. The reason is almost entirely attributable to the preservation of household food production knowledge across generations of Soviet citizens. Now here is the part that most retellings of this story miss entirely. The Russian families who survived with their nutritional dignity intact were not the ones who owned the most land. They were the ones who knew how to farm it. Academic economists and urban professionals who had acquired dachas as status symbols in the 1980s but had never learned to actually farm were no better protected than their urban neighbors. The soil was there. The seeds were available, but the knowledge of when to plant, how to manage pests without chemical inputs that had disappeared from shelves, how to preserve vegetables through a Russian winter, that was the survival variable. And that knowledge cannot be confiscated. It cannot be inflated away. It cannot be frozen by a bank holiday or wiped out by a currency collapse. An ounce of gold in 1992 Moscow could theoretically purchase food from whoever had it. But the person who could grow food did not need to find that seller. They did not need to negotiate that exchange. They did not need to trust that the transaction would complete in an environment where trust had collapsed along with every other institution. They simply went to their garden. The World Bank research on household food security during economic crises is consistent across every collapse environment studied. Households with active food production knowledge demonstrate substantially higher economic resilience than those without it, independent of the financial assets they hold. The second thing is the one that Buenos Aires taught the world in 2001 and that Beirut confirmed in 2019. The ability to read and operate across parallel monetary systems simultaneously. When a currency collapses, what is actually happening is that the official price signal, the system through which an economy communicates value, is being destroyed. Prices expressed in the dying currency become noise rather than signal, but humans still need to coordinate economic activity. They still need to buy food and pay rent and compensate labor. What they desperately need is someone who can translate between the dying signal and the emerging one. Buenos Aires, October 2011. On the corner of Florida Street and Laval, men stand on the sidewalk whispering one word to passing pedestrians. Cambio, exchange. They are called arbolitos, little trees, because they stand still and wait like trees for customers to come to them. They are the informal dollar traders of Argentina operating in defiance of government currency controls. The spread between the official rate and the black market rate sometimes exceeded 60%. These men were not educated in the conventional sense. Many had no formal qualifications. What they had was something far more operationally valuable: the ability to read price differentials between two parallel monetary systems in real time and facilitate the exchange between them. Lebanon 2019 to 2023. The Lebanese pound collapsed from 1,500 to the dollar to 89,000 to the dollar. The entire banking system froze. An entire middle class was financially annihilated. But throughout that collapse, saraf operators, informal currency exchange brokers deeply embedded in Lebanese commercial culture, continued functioning. They were the capillaries of the economy when the arteries had hardened. People who understood how to facilitate exchange between the dying pound and the dollar economy did not just survive, they became indispensable. Zimbabwe, 2007 to 2009. The official currency was imploding so fast that the government was printing $100 trillion notes, but the informal economy did not stop. It reorganized around the US dollar, the South African rand, and commodity barter. The people who acted as translation nodes between these parallel systems, who could price a transaction in multiple simultaneous currencies, were the lubricant that kept commerce from seizing entirely. Now here is the deeper mechanism that makes this skill more immediately valuable than gold in the acute collapse phase. Gold preserves value, but gold requires a functioning exchange mechanism to convert that value into the goods and services you need. In an environment where exchange mechanisms have broken down, the person who can facilitate exchange is not just preserving value. They are creating the infrastructure that allows value to move at all. That function, in a collapsing economy, commands a premium that no store of value can match because stores of value are inert without exchange infrastructure. The monetary translator is the exchange infrastructure. The third thing is the one that every military historian and every humanitarian crisis researcher has documented, with identical findings across completely different conflict and collapse environments. Medical knowledge that functions without institutional support. Havana, Cuba, 1993. The special period has exposed something brutal about the relationship between credentials and value. The hospital has no anesthetics, no antibiotics, often no electricity. The institutional system that transforms a medical credential into healing has collapsed. 10,000 Cuban doctors made the same calculation. They drove taxis. Their credential was not just economically worthless. It was a legal barrier preventing them from earning survival income in the informal economy. But here is the critical distinction that the forensic record across every collapse environment confirms. Medical knowledge, not the credential, not the institutional practice of medicine, but the underlying knowledge of human biology, disease, wound care, and basic pharmacology demonstrates extraordinary survival value precisely because it addresses the most fundamental human need of all, staying alive. The Cuban physicians who survived this special period with their economic dignity intact were those who had internalized medical knowledge deeply enough to practice it informally outside the hospital with whatever materials were available. Community-based healthcare in Cuba during the 1990s increasingly depended on practitioners who could diagnose and treat without imaging equipment, without pharmaceutical supply chains, using natural and improvised alternatives. The same pattern appeared in post-Soviet Russia, in post-collapse Venezuela, in every wartime and post-conflict environment studied by the World Bank. People who could set bones, suture wounds, manage infections with basic antiseptics, recognize and treat nutritional deficiencies, and provide basic care without hospital access constituted one of the most universally valued skill sets in every collapse environment examined. An ounce of gold can purchase medical care, if medical care is available for purchase. In an acute collapse environment where medical infrastructure has failed, the person who can provide that care directly does not need gold to access it. They are the thing that gold is trying to buy. That asymmetry, being the thing rather than holding the means to purchase the thing, is the structural reason medical knowledge outperforms gold as a survival asset in the specific conditions of acute institutional collapse. The fourth thing is the one that sounds the most mundane and carries the most operational power in a crisis environment. Repair skills applied to infrastructure that cannot be replaced. Buenos Aires, December 2001. A mechanic charges 50 pesos per hour before the crisis. After the devaluation, he charges 50 pesos per hour. The nominal number is the same, but in dollar terms, his services have become dramatically cheaper and demand has exploded. Argentines who had been trading in their cars for new models every 3 years suddenly need those same cars to last another decade. The mechanic who can make a 1995 Renault run another 100,000 kilometers is no longer a commodity. He is essential infrastructure. The NBER working papers on the 2001 to 2002 Argentine crisis confirm the pattern. Formal employment in finance, retail, and professional services collapsed. Skilled trades, mechanics, electricians, plumbers, and metalworkers saw employment hold, and in many cases real wages in the informal economy actually increased because supply contracted faster than demand. The Argentine automotive repair sector processed an estimated 30% more vehicles in 2002 than in 2000, despite the economic carnage. Weimar Germany, 1921 to 1923. As the mark fell from 75 per dollar to 4.2 trillion per dollar, institutional employment became economically worthless faster than the currency itself. But the skilled tradespeople who maintained the physical infrastructure of daily life operated in a parallel barter economy that the hyperinflation could not fully reach. A plumber in Berlin in 1923 was not paid in marks. He was paid in coal, bread, sausage, and firewood. His skills bypassed the dying monetary system entirely and plugged directly into the real economy of survival goods. This is the structural property that makes repair skills more immediately valuable than gold in a collapse environment. Gold is a store of value that requires a functioning exchange system to convert into goods. Repair skills are a direct claim on goods and services in a barter economy that bypasses the exchange system entirely. The plumber does not need to find a gold buyer and negotiate an exchange rate and trust that the transaction will complete. He fixes the pipe and receives food directly. The exchange is immediate, bilateral, and requires no institutional infrastructure to complete. In an environment where institutional infrastructure has collapsed, that directness is worth more than the most trusted store of value in history. The fifth thing is the newest one on this list, and it is the most controversial. But its performance across the specific conditions of currency collapse and capital controls has become impossible for serious monetary historians to ignore. Liquid, transferable, censorship-resistant digital assets held in self-custody. Specifically, the ability to store and transfer value across borders instantly without requiring any institutional intermediary that can be frozen, confiscated, or collapsed. This is not an argument for any specific cryptocurrency as a long-term store of value. The volatility and regulatory uncertainty around digital assets make that argument genuinely complex. This is an argument for a specific property that digital assets possess that gold does not: instant borderless transferability without institutional custody. When Nigeria implemented severe foreign exchange restrictions in 2021 and 2022, Bitcoin peer-to-peer trading volumes in Nigeria reached record highs as citizens used it to preserve purchasing power outside the controlled currency system. When the Canadian government froze the bank accounts of protesters in 2022 without court order, the Bitcoin held by those individuals in self-custody wallets was completely inaccessible to the government. When Russian citizens faced unprecedented financial sanctions in 2022 and needed to transact outside the collapsing ruble system, Bitcoin and stablecoins provided a parallel monetary rail that sanctions could not reach. Now compare this to gold in the same scenarios. Gold held in a Canadian bank vault was subject to the same institutional freeze as the bank accounts. Gold held physically in Nigeria could not be transferred to a counterparty in London without physical transportation across borders that were subject to customs controls. Gold held in Russia was subject to the same sanctions framework as every other Russian asset held through institutional channels. Physical gold held privately outside institutional custody retains its value in all of these scenarios. But it cannot be transmitted. It cannot be divided into precise fractions for small transactions. It cannot be sent to a counterparty in another country in seconds without physical movement. Digital assets held in self-custody can do all of those things. And in the specific crisis scenarios where those capabilities matter most, capital controls, banking system freezes, cross-border sanctions, the ability to transmit value instantly without institutional intermediation is not just valuable. It is the difference between financial survival and financial annihilation. The practical requirement is self-custody. Digital assets held on an exchange are held by an institution, and institutions can fail, be regulated, be hacked, or be compelled to freeze accounts by governments facing crises. Digital assets held in a hardware wallet in your physical possession are held by nobody except you. That distinction is as important for digital assets as physical possession is for gold. Now, here is what connects all five things. They share a single structural property that gold, for all its extraordinary historical performance, does not fully possess in the acute phase of a collapse. They generate or transfer value without requiring institutional infrastructure to function. Food production generates calories directly from land and knowledge without requiring a monetary system, a banking system, or an exchange mechanism to convert that production into survival. Monetary translation skills create exchange infrastructure in the vacuum left by collapsed institutions, generating value from the very dysfunction that destroys financial assets. Medical knowledge addresses the most fundamental human need directly without requiring a hospital, a pharmacy, or a functioning healthcare system to deliver its value. Repair skills generate immediate barter value in a direct bilateral exchange that bypasses every layer of institutional infrastructure simultaneously. Digital assets in self-custody transfer value across borders and between parties without requiring any institution to authorize, process, or complete the transaction. Gold preserves value across the full cycle of collapse and recovery with extraordinary reliability. But in the acute phase, when the institutions that normally convert stored value into needed goods and services have failed, the 5 things on this list are not competing with gold. They are providing something gold cannot provide in that specific moment. The ability to generate, transfer, and exchange value in an environment where the infrastructure that gold depends on to express its value has temporarily ceased to function. This is not a theoretical distinction. It is the forensic finding of every economic autopsy conducted on the acute phase of every major collapse in the modern era. The Argentine mechanic who kept cars running did not need to sell gold to buy food. The Russian dacha farmer who grew potatoes did not need to find a gold buyer to feed her family. The Lebanese saraf operator who facilitated dollar exchanges did not need a functioning banking system to generate income. The Cuban physician who treated patients with improvised materials did not need a hospital to deliver value. And the Nigerian citizen who transmitted savings across borders using a hardware wallet did not need a bank that was subject to government control to preserve purchasing power. Each of them had something that the person holding only gold did not have in that specific moment: the ability to create value without depending on the system that had just failed. That ability, across 800 years of economic collapse forensics, is the most valuable thing any human being can possess when the economy breaks. Not because gold does not work. Gold works extraordinarily well across the full collapse and recovery cycle. But because in the specific window when institutions are failing and supply chains are breaking and monetary systems are reorganizing, the people who can generate, transfer, and exchange value without institutional infrastructure are not just surviving. They are the infrastructure that everyone else, including the gold holders, depends on to convert stored value into survival. Understanding that distinction does not mean abandoning gold. It means building a complete crisis resilience portfolio that includes the store of value that gold reliably provides and the generative capabilities that the 5 things on this list provide in the acute phase when stored value alone is not sufficient. The people who came through every major collapse in recorded history with their dignity intact were not the people who held only one thing. They were the people who held the right combination of things for the specific sequence of conditions that a collapse actually produces. Gold for the long cycle, food production for the immediate caloric independence, monetary translation for the exchange environment, medical knowledge for the most fundamental human need, repair skills for the barter economy, digital assets for the borderless transfer of value. That combination is not a doomsday portfolio. It is the forensically validated response to conditions that monetary history has produced before, and is showing early signs of producing again. Subscribe, because the patterns are accelerating and the next lesson from history is already in motion.